August 1944, somewhere over the Philippine Sea. The darkness is absolute. No moon, no horizon line, no reference point between the water below and the sky above. At 15,000 feet, the air is cold enough to bite through flight suits, and the only sound inside the cockpit is the twin growl of two Pratt & Whitney radials turning over at cruise power. The crew cannot see the enemy. The enemy cannot see them. That is the entire point. The aircraft carrying this three-man crew does not look like anything else flying in the United States Army Air Force's inventory. It is enormous, twin boom, twin engine, black from nose to tail, not painted black but lacquered, a deep flat finish designed to swallow radar returns and starlight equally. The fuselage is wide enough to house a radar operator behind the pilot, separated by equipment racks loaded with electronics that most fighter pilots in 1944 have never seen and could not explain. The wingspan stretches 66 feet, wider than a B-17's wing section. It weighs nearly 30,000 pounds fully loaded. It carries four 20mm cannons in a ventral tray and four 50 caliber machine guns in a remote-controlled dorsal turret that can rotate to face almost any threat. It can locate targets in total darkness, close to within firing range, and kill before the enemy crew knows anything has moved into their airspace. The United States Army Air Forces calls it the P-61 Black Widow. At this moment, in August 1944, the Black Widow has been operational for fewer than 3 months. It will become the most effective dedicated night fighter the United States ever put into combat in the Second World War. Almost nobody outside of those who flew it would remember that it existed. To understand why the P-61 Black Widow existed, you need to understand what the night was doing to Allied bombers over Europe in 1940. The German Luftwaffe's night fighter arm, the Nachtjagdgeschwader, had transformed darkness into a weapon. Equipped with airborne radar systems and directed by a network of ground controllers, German night fighters were finding and killing RAF bombers that believed the darkness was their protection. The losses were catastrophic. Whole squadrons were being dismantled over Germany and occupied Europe in engagements the British public never fully understood, because the aircraft and crews simply did not come back. There was no wreckage to explain, no survivors to debrief. They vanished into the dark. The United States Army Air Forces watched this happen and drew a conclusion that would prove prescient. When America entered the war and began its own strategic bombing campaign, it would eventually need to operate at night. And operating at night without a dedicated airborne radar-equipped fighter escort was a death sentence. In October 1940, the USAAF issued a specification for a purpose-built night fighter. Not a converted day fighter adapted with radar bolted on. A ground-up design built around the radar set as the primary weapon system. The aircraft had to be fast enough to chase bombers and interceptors, stable enough to carry sensitive radar equipment, large enough to house a three-man crew, pilot, radar operator, and gunner, and armed heavily enough to destroy anything it found in a single firing pass. Northrop Aircraft Corporation, based in Hawthorne, California, took the contract. Jack Northrop's engineering team designed the twin boom configuration specifically to give the radar operator maximum equipment space in a wide central nacelle, while keeping the tail surfaces clear of interference. The aircraft was large by fighter standards, deliberately so. The Westinghouse SCR-720 airborne radar set required physical space and power draw that no single engine fighter could accommodate. Northrop built the airframe around the radar's requirements and then fitted the engines and armament around what remained. The first XP-61 prototype flew in May 1942. Full production aircraft didn't reach operational squadrons until mid-1944. A gap driven by manufacturing priority disputes, engine availability problems, and persistent debate within the USAAF over whether a dedicated night fighter was necessary at all when radar-equipped versions of the P-38 Lightning were theoretically available. They were not, in practice, sufficient. The P-61 entered service over both the Pacific and European theaters within weeks of each other in the summer of 1944, arriving at the precise moment when Japanese and German night operations were intensifying. What made the Black Widow mechanically distinctive was not any single system, but the deliberate integration of every system into a coherent killing machine. The two Pratt & Whitney R-2800-65 double WASP radials each produced 2,000 horsepower, giving the aircraft a top speed of 366 miles per hour at 26,000 feet, fast enough to run down any contemporary bomber and competitive with most night fighter conversions the Luftwaffe was flying. The R-2800 was the same engine family powering the Grumman F-6F Hellcat and the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, which meant parts and maintenance expertise were available throughout the supply chain. In a night fighter, reliability was not a performance metric, it was a survival metric. Engines that failed over water or over enemy territory at night offered no graceful recovery options. The armor protection was modest by medium bomber standards. The Black Widow was not designed to absorb punishment, but to deliver it and disengage. The four 20mm M2 cannons mounted in the ventral tray could fire a combined weight of shell that would destroy an aircraft in a burst measured in fractions of a second. The remote-controlled dorsal turret, housing four M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, was theoretically operable by the gunner from a separate sighting station, though in practice the turret was frequently locked in the forward position by crew preference to reduce aerodynamic drag and vibration. The defining system was the Westinghouse SCR-720 radar. Against contemporaries like the British de Havilland Mosquito, which carried the AI Mark 10 radar, the SCR-720 offered comparable detection range of approximately 5 miles against a bomber-sized target with a narrower beam that reduced clutter in mountainous terrain. The Mosquito was faster and smaller and more versatile. The Black Widow was more capable at night in complex terrain, more heavily armed, and could absorb a crew of 3 with room for their equipment without structural compromise. The Mosquito was a better aircraft in many ways. The Black Widow was a better night fighter in specific conditions. That distinction would matter enormously over the Philippines. Before we get into where the Black Widow actually fought, if this kind of deep operational history is what you come here for, hit subscribe. It costs nothing, takes 1 second, and keeps this channel building the stories that the mainstream histories left on the cutting room floor. The 6th Night Fighter Squadron deployed to the Pacific in mid-1944, operating initially from Saipan in the Mariana Islands before moving forward as the American advance pressed toward the Philippines. The Japanese had developed a consistent doctrine of night harassment, using aircraft to attack American positions, airfields, and supply lines during hours when radar-equipped defenders were scarce. The Black Widow was the answer that the Pacific Command had been waiting for. On the night of July 6, 1944, First Lieutenant Dale Haberman, flying with radar operator Sergeant Raymond Mooney, made the Black Widow's first confirmed aerial kill of the war. They intercepted a Japanese Mitsubishi G-4M bomber, designated Betty by Allied forces, at altitude over the Marianas. Haberman closed to within firing range using the SCR-720, acquired visually at close distance, and destroyed the aircraft with a single burst from the ventral cannons. The engagement lasted minutes. The Betty crew never knew anyone was there. It was the first of many. By the end of the Marianas campaign, the 6th Night Fighter Squadron had established a pattern that would repeat across every theater the Black Widow entered. Systematic, methodical elimination of Japanese night harassment operations that had previously operated with near impunity. Japanese crews flying nocturnal missions began reporting contacts with an aircraft they could not identify, could not shake, and could rarely see before it fired. The kill exchanges were rarely equal. A Japanese Betty carried a crew of 7. The Black Widow carried 3. The mathematics of those exchanges accumulated quickly. The Pacific Campaign produced the Black Widow's most decorated pilot. Captain Carroll Smith of the 418th Night Fighter Squadron flew 64 combat missions over New Guinea, the Philippines, and the approaches to the Japanese home islands. Smith was credited with 7 confirmed aerial victories, all at night, all using radar intercepts, making him the only dedicated night fighter ace of the USAAF in the Pacific. He was 26 years old when he finished his combat tour. He never fired a single shot in daylight. Half a world away, over the mountains of northern Italy, a different story was unfolding. The 414th Night Fighter Squadron operated from airfields in the Italian theater from late 1944, tasked with intercepting German supply flights and reconnaissance aircraft that used the Alps and the Po Valley's complex terrain as cover.